You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. We're live on Joy FM. We're live on the Joy News channel as well. Thank you for staying with us. Today we are talking about the Bank of Ghana. We will also talk about the Auditor General, who has retrieved through surcharges an amount of 67 million Ghana cedis. We'll talk about that in a bit. We'll be joined on the phone by Mr. Joseph Winful, and in the studio we have with us right now Esan Kuma, Mr. Osei JC, and Nana Utu Achampong. They are here with us for the conversation on banking. And just before the break, I gave you details of the report from the Bank of Ghana that outlines the reasons why Heritage Bank lost its license. And the last thing I told you about was this confusion over whether indeed the bank had its fully paid up capital at the time it received a license. There are other details. I'll share one more with you and then we'll get into the conversation. Now, apparently, certain shares of the bank were held by nominee shareholders whose ultimate beneficial shareholders were not disclosed to the Bank of Ghana. The shareholder on record for Sarago, for example, is one Ruth Lina Abaziri. But the Bank of Ghana has reasonable grounds to believe that Sarago is owned by Seydou Agongo. This, of course, they describe as a breach of Section 9 of the Anti-Money Laundering Act, which requires the disclosure of beneficial ownership of shares, as well as the Regulation 9 of the Anti-Money Laundering Regulations, that's the LI 1987, which requires that beneficial owners must not be fictitious. Right, several related party transactions were entered into here as well with the Heritage Bank, between the bank and entities owned or controlled by Mr. Agongo, the significant shareholder. Some companies are named: Sash Alliance, Moore Company Limited, Kedge Company Limited. And the terms and conditions for these related party transactions remain unclear and or not transparent. These are the words of the Bank of Ghana. So they determined that Mr. Agongo does not meet the fit and proper person test. And then, of course, the bank failed to meet the 400 million capitalization requirement anyway. But you must ask yourself, why were they disqualified for that when there was so much more going on in this bank before? Ace, I'm going to start with you. Heritage Bank, certainly not what it seems.
Yes, just some technical clarifications. When a company is formed, it's formed with what is called shares, which represents the investment that each shareholder has made in the entity. Not all issued shares are necessarily paid for at the time the company is formed. So we could form a company, and the four of us is 25% shareholding across individually. I am not really required to pay for all my 25% shares. But if we must meet a minimum capital requirement, either minimum capital requirement for setting up the company, which says that we have this amount of cash sitting down for the company, or a capital adequacy ratio, which goes to the banks, then we must put that money forward. And based on what Bank of Ghana may decide on the equity and debt mix, that this is how it should come in. Now, but along the line, the company may make calls on shareholders, which says, we gave you 25% shares. You paid for only 20. There's 5% left. We are making a call on you to provide that money. Then you provide it. If you don't provide it, you might forfeit those shares. And it goes, let's get slightly technical. It goes into the concept of the limited liability, which says that a shareholder is not liable for the debts of the company except to amounts unpaid on his, her, or its shares. So that can happen in the normal business. So but it gets back to the key point. Did they really provide sufficient evidence of meeting the CAR? If they did not, then of course, like I said, the buck stops, to my mind, with Bank of Ghana. Let's also get to the issue of beneficial ownership. Along the amendment, or the enactment of Act 1980 was a major amendment to our Companies Act, which now demands full disclosure of beneficial ownership. Because what happens is that people hide behind the corporate veil, and they are the real the law, there's a legal referring term, aminons gris, the real person sitting there directing the affairs of the company, but covered with a veil, the children, relatives, nieces. So you can find a person who can rub two pennies together, being the sole shareholder of a big company. The law says, wait a second, you have nothing. How are you the sole shareholder of this? Well, we see your uncle. Your uncle has a lot of money. We don't think that you are the real shareholder. Make a disclosure of beneficial ownership. And indeed, under our money laundering laws, you must disclose beneficial ownership. So if the Bank of Ghana found out that although a person is named as a shareholder, that person is a man or woman of straw, and that really there's the aminons gris hiding behind it, who is the real person is the de facto director, etc., etc. Then the law will go beyond that and address that. And these are things that hopefully Bank of Ghana will detect in saying that, well, based on these circumstances, we don't think that you are a fit and proper person to be a shareholder or a director of a bank. Bank of Ghana has that power to declare you unfit and improper so let's go there. Let me also explain the Agongo High Court issues, because it's a pending matter. One has to be careful the extent. But I believe what Bank of Ghana is saying is that these assets, as far as we are concerned, are incumbent one way or the other. We cannot pretend that we do not know that there are pending court proceedings where these source of funds have been raised, have been questioned. We, Bank of Ghana, don't want to get embroiled in that fight. We don't want to have a fight with the Ghana government over who really owns those assets. And we don't want to wait for a court to determine that. We just don't want to touch it. And Bank of Ghana has the power to say, this capital, there are too much questions about it. And Bank of Ghana is setting a good example, because pending before the Supreme Court for determination, that maybe in the next few weeks, is an instance where assets that were allegedly sold to a bank were used by the vendor as security to take a loan from the same bank subsequently. And so the Supreme Court is going to have to decide whether those assets were really encumbered by way of a mortgage to the bank, or this was an attempt, as the law says, to defraud creditors. And so, like I said, the market is getting very intelligent. Bank of Ghana is entitled to say, you know what, we're not going to touch that. That property has too much stink on it, and we don't want it anywhere near us. Replace it with something else. These are the sort of things that we are coming up, and that is why maybe my confidence in the system is growing. That Bank of Ghana is becoming more what's the word? It's becoming better,
right?
And they begin to ask more questions, and they are not accepting paper as money anymore. That the things that happen should not happen anymore. Yes, and I'm happy about the stance that this won't happen again going forward. But we must still look back and ensure that when we don't have good people like you at the bank, and they appoint someone like me, and I want to steal, the system and the structure you have put in place will catch up with me.
The strong institutions that's
the mix between the strong institutions and the strong people, because we may not always have the strong people to lead them. You might have a weakling, you might have an idiot like me, and you need to have a system that's idiot-proof, so that even if someone like me is running it, the system, the structure will still work. If they come to you and declare falsely that they have money, or they cook their books and bring to Bank of Ghana, several offenses are committed. Yes. As for Ghana, we don't need new law. We have enough to stop every wrong. We just don't have the people to enforce them. If I mislead Bank of Ghana, first offense, deceit of public officer, because they are public officers. Under law, I cannot deceive Mr. Agency. So if I take something to him that is false, I have committed an offense straight off the bat. I should be making a beeline to jail. If I cook the books, and in one of the banks, interesting, a related party wanted X amount of money, millions. Single obligo, so they cooked the books to show that that X entity had invested, and look at how they play on the words investment and loan, had invested that same amount of money in the bank. There was no underlying cash movement. And then issued a paper on the basis of the investment, gave it to X company to take it to Bank Y to take a loan on the security of the non-existent investment, and then the bank paid the security. Now, people got very clever, criminally clever and smart, and simply because the officials who were supposed to spot these things were not spotting them. So we've seen them now. Clearly, there's false accounting, another offense. Fraud by agents, which is the private law complement of corruption. that if you as an employee of Joy FM took money from me today to feature me on this program, it's an offense. People have forgotten that Section 145 exists. There's racketeering. If it shows that, look, they actually sat together to plan these things and get it working. So if we, going forward, I think that we need to be aware, and the people who are dealing with Bank of Ghana ought to deal with Bank of Ghana with trepidation. Look, after more than 2 decades of being a lawyer, I am never nervous whenever I'm going to the Supreme Court. Because it is the Supreme Court. It's 5 people who are wiser and smarter than you, who can tell you anything, and you can't say Jack, you only say as the court pleases. When people are approaching Bank of Ghana, they ought to have the same amount of trepidation, that we are going to the central bank, which can switch us off just like that. Not that we are going to a place that we can influence and send money to influence decisions or to make people fall asleep. And so going forward, I think that some of the things that have happened might sound harsh, but they are necessary. They are necessary. These things that happen should never happen again. And never again includes rebuilding those structures and making sure that nobody is breaching them anymore. So for example, we have seen that it's been through related party transactions that they've been siphoning of money. I'm not a banker, but from where I say, all right, then we probably have to have a mini department on related party transactions, which takes monthly reporting across board. That's their job, or part of their job. That is their duty, because that's where the cadavers are buried. That is where the mines were buried. And so we need people whose job it is to ensure that these banks are being kept on a short leash, at least until this culture is drummed into their heads. They are kept on a very short leash on related party transactions. They are reporting on a day-to-day basis, is being vetted, and think, look, there were times when people went to Bank of Ghana and said, we want to give a loan in excess of our single obligor limits, which means Bank of Ghana must approve. Yeah. Bank of Ghana didn't approve. Bank of Ghana also didn't approve. So they went ahead and did it through another entity. So literally, they played the system. They gamed the system and made money. And unless and until we're going to go after them and recover what we can recover, we must pursue, we must overtake and recover what is recoverable. Because now all the money, let's be honest, what, 9.9 billion is the support, total support? About 9.9, 12 billion yeah, of money that would have made the road to my house. Let's not forget this. This is money that would have built up stuff for Ghana. You are giving us how much 67 million cedis could have, what 67 million cedis could have done for hospital beds. Yeah. Think about this. 12.5 or so billion cedis of money that could have gone to make our lives better, stabilized the city, is now being spent. They've raised bonds, but somebody's going to pay for the bonds. Yeah. And so this hits every Ghanaian. 25, 30 million Ghanaians. Think about this, divided by 12.5 billion cedis. This is our money that we are literally investing back in the system. We need to have some recoveries. The people who did this ought to pay the price. I'm not talking about jail terms, but at least can we get our monies back?
Right now, just before
let me just. I think I respect the what Ace said, that this case is in court, so we have to be very circumspect. And the governor was clear in his message that the major issue is fit and proper.
Fit and proper test.
Yeah. But you take a financial statement of a bank, and you're looking at the assets, and you have other assets, and you have in there maybe as part of the assets of the bank unpaid calls on shares as part of the assets. Then the question that somebody will ask, if the person really appreciates financial statement, financial reporting, is where is the credit? If there's an asset as part of the other assets, unpaid calls on shares, then somebody will ask, where did the credit go? Is it part of the paid up capital? Because if the paid up capital is intact, it's only when paid up capital is intact that you can have that asset. Or they created that and created other liability. Certainly no, because if you look at the paid up capital, it is telling you that it is intact. It is 120 million. If it is 120 million, then what we are saying is that figure in the other asset account, the financial reporting will tell you that it's part of the paid up. That is my comment on this whole thing. But the other issues about agri-court and all those things, I think it's the subject of the court
on this
matter.
issue of the unpaid call.
So let's
leave the court. Let's leave the court matter.
But to section 156, which is the interpretation section of Act 930. Fit and proper, there are 4 tests there, and this heritage issue fails on all 4. So I don't think you need to even refer to the court case. There's one. The first one is probity, competence and soundness of judgment of the person for the purpose of fulfilling the responsibilities. Now, from the account that Bank of Ghana gave, it falls on this one. Second is the diligence with which that person fulfills or is likely to fulfill those responsibilities. Again, then the third one is whether the interest of depositors or potential depositors are threatened, and if the basis on which this bank has been formed is questioned, then you got it. Then lastly is the integrity of the person is established and the qualification and experience. Right. So on all counts, you see that it's a question of fit and proper.
Right. Now, I know Mr. Osei Jesse has to leave us in a moment, but I have a quick question for him on the paid up capital issue. I agree, let's stay away from the Cocoa Board and court matter. But this issue of the paid up capital, which you explained quite clearly in accounting terms for us. Ace said something earlier that when you incorporate a company, you don't necessarily, the capital doesn't necessarily all have to be right there. But when you are seeking a license, a banking license, is that also the case? Or must you not be able to show evidence that this money, in their case, 120 million at the time, is actually there and traceable?
You see, when you're doing capital verification, you have to perform various tests. Availability of the capital, the source of the capital, and size of the capital. Are you getting it? If you say, is the capital available? There are other considerations. You say yes. The source of the capital, is it clean? Who are the personalities involved and all those things? You say yes. Then what is the size of the capital available? Because before you are given the license, you have to demonstrate to us, and we have to satisfy ourselves that if it is 400 million, you have brought 400 million and it is available. In the case of banks, we don't do what we call where you have first call, second call, and as and when the proceeds come in, you pass the necessary entries. You need all the capital must be available right from the word go. So the issue of first call, second call, and all those things, final call, are not applicable when you are licensed in a bank. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So finally, so in this case, what was the main reason why their license was revoked? It would appear from the timing that it was because they didn't meet the 400 million capital required as of 31st December. But there were so many other issues that preceded that. Why was Heritage Bank not closed before yesterday? Or why was the license not revoked before yesterday?
You see, you come out with some of these things, and you would want to do your background work, you want to investigate, you build the evidence, collect data, collect information. Then the final decision would have to be made. I get it. And it takes time to go through all these things. You see, you don't want to take a decision that's my brother Ace will tell you, that at the end of the day, it will backfire. You have integrity as far as the regulator is concerned. So you have to make sure you have exhausted all the processes and procedures involved. You've built your case. So some of these things might take time. And for some, depending on the situation, you would want to work with the bank. I'm not talking about Heritage. You would want to work with the bank in the interest of depositors to find out how best you would want the situation could be corrected. If you look at the law talks about prompt corrective measures. Depending on the situation in which the bank finds itself, you would want to apply certain corrective actions to see whether the bank could, but the bank's affairs could be improved before you finally pull the trigger. In the interest of depositors and in the interest, look at what we are seeing now. We just don't go and say, I'm shutting the bank down. Have you gone through the requirements of the law in making the final decision?
In this bank's case, there were some of the issues that came from audited financial statements, So, for example, this issue of the unpaid called up share capital. We found out in 2017 about this. Issues of them refusing to name beneficial shareholders. These have been going on for quite a while. But are you saying that there was a need? Explain to me again the reason why, in spite of the fact that some of these facts were known back then, there was such a slow march to a final decision.
But at the end of the day, the decision has been made. I agree that the longer it takes for corrective actions to be taken,
the more risk you are putting.
I agree. The longer it takes for you to fix, control delays, expose an organization to a higher risk. I agree. I'm not disputing that. But what I'm saying is that, you see, we should be happy that at the end of the day, the final decision has been made. Are you getting it? For me, that is it. After we had gone through the necessary processes and procedures, are you getting it? The final decision has been made. And looking at this case, looking at this particular case, my appeal, my plea is that if we can be very circumspect. Are you getting it?
There are other issues at play.
I'm saying that this is a subject of a court matter. Are you getting it? And I'm not a lawyer, but I think that if you are not careful, we'll be cited for contempt.
Well,
so please let's
steering clear of the court.
Yes, so I want to stay clear of
understood. So just before you go, GN Bank, talk to us. They've been downgraded.
No, they've been reclassified.
Reclassified.
Yeah.
So it's not a downgrading.
The governor never used the word reclassified.
No, I used it.
You see, if you use downgrading, the implication is that other institutions in that sector are inferior. But we have savings and loans and finance houses that are doing very well.
5 classes of license.
You get it, yeah.
Right, which was in the bill for the act, but somehow Parliament took the list out. But the list is there. There are 5 classes: universal bank, savings and loans, finance house, rural banks, and microfinance. So you can get that class, and the act simply said that your license should state the class that you are in. So all that happened with GN Bank is that they gave back their universal bank license and applied for and received a savings and loan license. So it was reclassification, being reclassified from universal bank to a savings and loan. There are 1 or 2 things they cannot do as a universal bank, but when we get to it, we will go into detail.
Very well. So in terms of the future of GN Bank, they could reapply for a universal license at some point in the future?
For now, that's the decision of shareholders. But for now, it is supposed to operate as a savings and loan. And my big brother said they have to curtail, or they have to reduce the scope of their operations. Because if you're operating as a savings and loan, there are some activities that you cannot do. The law doesn't allow you to undertake those activities. And like we said, we have within 6 months, they would have to make sure that they fall in line. And the statement also said that an advisor has been appointed for them. And the essence is to improve the affairs of the bank and help management look at the governance issues for a period that the central bank thinks is necessary. Are you getting it? Yeah, so it is, and some liquidity will also be made available. The shareholders will bring in some liquidity to ensure that depositors will be in a position to access their funds.
Would GN Bank not have made the minimum capital if they had been added to the GATT initiative, the Ghana Amalgamated Trust initiative?
You see, this is a private sector-led initiative, pension funds. So it is for them to decide those institutions that they want to bring on board. Are you getting it? Yes. And you can be sure that this funding will be, you can access these funds based on very stringent conditions.
So they are the ones who decided on which
Yeah,
five
yeah,
banks.
yeah, they decide. It is not Bank of Ghana, it's not government funds. That is one thing you must know. And the Ministry of Finance will come out in due course to clarify the situation. The pension funds will come out. Yes, so they
Is
decided.
Consolidated Bank going to have to find extra money to consolidate Premium Bank?
You see, what is happening is that the licenses of those two banks have been revoked, and all deposits have been transferred to Consolidated Bank.
The Premium Bank was insolvent.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. Then some selected assets have also been transferred to Consolidated Bank. So looking at the size of the deposits by way of liabilities and the assets that have been transferred, the liabilities outweigh the assets. So they will need some more assets. And this is where the bonds come in. The government is going to issue the bonds so that the two sides will be the same. Yeah, so it's a cost to the taxpayer.
1.4 billion.
All right.
And there's an elephant in the room we are not addressing. Let me
But let's say a quick thank you.
No,
Yeah,
before you go.
okay, Mr. Osei, I think this is
There's
for
an
you.
elephant in the room. My view, and let me repeat it, is that it took a change in leadership of the central bank for these matters to be addressed. We can never forget that. It took changes in the leadership for these to be addressed. This didn't start in 2018 or 2017. This has been going on from about 2014, when repeated bank inspection reports made adverse findings against these banks, and next to nothing happened. All we did effectively was to pour more money into the rot.
Yeah.
So when they blew their money, the taxpayer money was given to them, which they've blown as well. And so it's like you have a saw, and what you do is to just shovel money into it. It took a change of leadership. Let me make a statement I've made here that we need in Ghana men with testicular fortitude and women with mammary fortitude to deal with some of these issues. And we cannot forget that it had to take a change of leadership in the central bank for this to happen. I just must say this.
Mr. Osei Jesse is the head of banking supervision
I don't envy you.
at the Bank of Ghana. We certainly appreciate your time with us. And yes, I think I have to echo Ace's sentiments that it takes bravery, to come and speak about matters which directly affect the unit you are in charge of, and current and previous members of that unit. We're going to take a break. When we come back,
thank you very much.
Thank you too. Thank you. Now, when we come back, we will very briefly wrap up on the banking matter and then settle in for the Auditor General, who has retrieved 67 million Ghana cedis for the national coffers through surcharges. But this is the latest step in a very long journey. And we'll assess our situation and see what ought to happen next. Stay with us. We're back after these. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. And we have been talking about what we heard from the governor of the Bank of Ghana yesterday in the press conference. Our guests, Sankuma and Nanu Tuachampong. Earlier we had Mr. Osei Jesse, the head of banking supervision at the Bank of Ghana. He had to take his leave. We've also spoken to Dr. Dan Sedo. He's a financial consultant. In a moment, we're going to get into our next issue, which is the Auditor General's retrieval of 67 million Ghana cedis through surcharges. Before that, I think to wrap up on the banking issue, Nana, if you could give us the current state of the banking sector in numbers.
Okay, as you said earlier, the reforms actually started on day one that the new governor took over. Took over on 1st of April 2017. I think I did some going back to his research for his PhD, and really it was on financial sector reforms, the adjustment. So
McGill
that's right. Yeah. So it's no wonder that he started with the reform. And at that time, we had 36 universal banks. As we said earlier, there are 5 types of licenses that are given according to Section 156, definition of terms for Act 930, that is deposit-taking institutions. So we have the universal banks, we have the savings and loans, the finance houses, rural banks, and microfinance institutions. And Section 8 of the Act gives you the type of license that you have to have. So going back to the GN1, what they've had to do is to get reclassified from a universal bank to a savings and loan. I mean, two things that stand out when you become a savings and loan. A, you don't have access to clearing. So they are somebody else have to clear their checks now. So they have to pick it back on one of the universal banks to go into clearing. Then secondly, you are not allowed to do forex trading. So presently there are some forex transactions that they are in, and they've been given up to 6 months to unwind those transactions because they are now a universal bank. Sorry, savings and loan. Now, the position as at pre-14th August 2017 was 36 banks of universal banks, of which 19 were Ghanaian majority owned and 17 were foreign owned. So in terms of percentages, we had 53% to 47% in favor of Ghanaians. Then 14th of August dawned and 2 banks were resolved. Purchase and assumption by GCB of UT and Capital. So it moved the numbers in the opposite direction, where the Ghanaian ones became 15 and the foreign 19. So the percentages respectively were 44% Ghanaian and 56% foreign. Then you fast forward to August 2018 and 5 banks were resolved and 1 replaced. And so when we did that, the Ghanaian banks became 12 plus 1, 13. And then the foreign banks remained at 17. So you got 43% to 53% Ghanaian versus foreign owned. And then we now come to the end of December, and as given yesterday by the governor, we have 23 universal banks now, of which 9 are Ghanaian owned and 14 foreign owned. The foreign owned has gone down by 3 because 1 has left, Baroda has left, then 1 has merged, Sahel has merged, and then another foreign has taken over another foreign, being the case of First Atlantic and Energy Bank. So the percentages now are Ghanaian owned banks 39%, and then foreign owned 61%. So that is how it stands. But
is that
yes,
a healthy ratio?
Well, there isn't any mathematical way of getting an optimal level for these ratios. It depends on your economy. Ghana is a free market economy. We haven't got any entry to barrier entries, except that you meet the requirement. And once you meet the requirement, then you can set up shop. But I want to repeat what I said right at the onset, that now they have more funds available to the reduced banks from 36 to 23, falling by 36%. But then in terms of funding, we have 233% more, because previously we had 2.7 billion theoretically, and now theoretically something about 9.2 billion. Now, this level of 400 million is what you call regulatory capital. And by regulatory capital is the capital that the regulator sets. Now, we call it a one-size-fits-all, because irrespective of the size of any of these 23 banks, that is the minimum you need. However, Basel II calls for an alignment between regulatory and economic capital. Economic capital is dictated by the type of business that you are doing. So if you take Baroda, say, versus Barclays Bank, the sort of economic activity that Baroda was doing was a fraction of what, say, Barclays or Stanchart or GCB would have done. So regulatory capital said everybody 400 million. And now when Baroda then asked themselves, what would you do with 400 million? Because even the 120 at the time, they had 60 million. The 60 million, we were putting about 90% in treasury bills. Now the treasury bill sales are going down, and so what would they do with 400 million? And this is one of the reasons why they said we didn't need to be here, because in terms of capital adequacy ratio, they had something like 43% CAR, so they didn't have any problem there. But then the economic capital versus the regulatory capital didn't fit their model, and that's why they left. But the new going forward, I think the regulator may have come to the last point in raising this capital. So when, as Dr. Sedo was saying, people are using the volatility of the exchange rate as a way of raising capital, because now a new system that is aligning Basel 2 with 3 is Capital Requirement Directive, which is using ICAP. ICAP is the internally assessed capital model that will relate to the risk that you are taking as a bank. And now, once that comes into effect, well, it has come into effect because with effect from 1st January, it means that this is the floor for your capital, but the ceiling is open. So you can have as much as 2 billion or 500 million, but you shouldn't fall below the 400 million. But the topmost is up to you as to where you want to pitch. So hopefully, now that we have got this regulatory capital resolved, and we have brought in ICAP, which is going to give us the economic capital, it's good for the system, and it's good for banking, and I hope that we'll be able to make the best out of the situation. So sometimes, in some misfortunes, there's a blessing.
Silver
we
lining,
have lost
right?
13 banks along the way. We have ended up with 23. Not as bad as they had in Nigeria and Malaysia. But Nigeria had 89. They ended up with some 22, 23. Malaysia had 18. They ended up with 12. So if we started with 36 and we've ended up with 23, in my view, it's not too bad. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Nana.
And hopefully the system where the banks, you're right, basically we're doing treasury bills as a substantial part of their business. Maybe those days are also over. The finance ministry and the Bank of Ghana had made sure that the interest is not as attractive as it used to be anymore.
Right,
It forces the government to borrow less, and it pushes the banks now to ask, what do we do with the money that we have? Because if you go into treasury bills, yes, it's interest-free, risk-free, but you're not going to get as much as you were getting in the past.
Yeah.
In fact, treasury bills got so lucrative that banks took government money and bought treasury bills from the government.
Unbelievable. That's
they'll
another
take-
round-tripping.
They'll take money from Bank of Ghana
Model.
and buy treasury bills through another bank. So effectively, the government is paying interest on its own money.
My word.
Hopefully, those days are over forever.
And hopefully that means that some of this capital ends up in the hands of private businesses.
This is going to be the true test of probably the true test of our economy.
Yeah.
Whether the people who are prepared to borrow are prepared to put the money into good use to pay back. Because one of the reasons why interest rates are high is the risk. And let's be blunt, the risk of lending money to the local businessman and the risk of default, because defaults are huge. They take the loans and the monies are not paid back, so the banks are in trouble.
Yeah.
They're having to restructure and they are in court. No bank wants to be involved in restructuring loans and going back to court. So now there's a test to the banks. There's a test to us. They said that the sweetness of the pudding is in the eating of it. I say that the tree version is that or the other one, So the test, now we have the test.
Yeah.
The Ghanaian business person. Let's show that we are not people with feet of clay, that we can take monies from the bank, turn it around and pay the banks back.
Yeah.
The banks themselves now have to start chasing people with money.
Yeah.
They have to start chasing people with money. Now you have so much money.
Yeah.
Let's see what you do with it. So these might be exciting times. Might be. Let's see whether 5 years down the line we won't come and sit back here and say, guess what? This is another lost opportunity. Because that's the story of Ghana.
Yeah.
The story of Ghana is a story of lost opportunities. I hope I hope we don't lose this one.
I pray so too. I'll read a couple of messages. I have a couple on my phone and then we'll move on. Yao Sumpa sends this one. He says, there is a bigger question as I listen to you. Please ask Nana, what is the total asset size of the industry and what percentage is held by locals or foreigners? Because the numbers could be misleading of the ownership of the industry. And then he says a bank like Unibank might have been 2 or 3 foreign banks if it still existed. So to get perspective of the asset ownership would be a good indicator.
Okay. I think for this, we need to wait for the Bank of Ghana's next set of figures, because the latest I have days back to November. So when the January one comes out, then we will know that relationship. Yeah.
Another message, and it says, Kojo, in the issues discussed so far, I have not heard that any employee of the affected banks contributed to the causes of the revocation of these licenses. Yet BOG was silent on how these workers will be compensated. Capital and UT Bank staff are still at home with nothing to live on. And that's from Aben. I guess he's worried about a repetition of what happened the last time banks...
Somebody was asking me about Baroda. I mean, Baroda had 25 staff, of which more than 50% were Indians, so they're going back. So the Ghanaian staff, you know, and I'm sure that number of staff, Stanbic will be ready to take them on.
Wow.
This is from Charles. He says, good show, but please ask the banking supervisor, oh, he's left, why the central bank is using the fit and proper test on the Heritage CEO, but not the ADB MD, who is also in court. Why use the law sparingly? Interesting issue there. Nana, I wonder if you have a perspective on that.
Not really.
I thought you'd stay away from that. I think